Hey folks, totally not named Dan of the future here, though you can still call me Dan if you want. Going back in time a little bit to show you the deck that qualified me for last year's Nationals. Because I feel like he's very important to, well, a question that I've been asked by a lot of people. Because it turns out, become 9th at Regionals, the first thing everybody wants to know, well, the second thing they want to know after whether or not you're playing Retro the following day, is what are you playing at the next Regionals? And of course, I had no idea. Why would I know what I was playing at the next Regionals? That was over a set away, and I'd only just made the deck for the Regionals I'd been at. Kind of a ridiculous question if you ask me. But, you know, I thought about it a bit, I had some ideas. I was considering playing Pony because I have a 40 card version of Pony essentially. We'll show you how that works later on. Then I was considering Zero 2. Because think about it. All you gotta do is hit with 4 Tasty Riff, then play the win con, and you win. How do you guarantee you hit with 4 Tasty Riff? Wait for your opponent to play a backup, and then just tutor through your deck every time you hit. Because being both a tech and an ally, a lot of stuff you can do there. That deck might make it to a future video as well, we'll see. But recently, they've announced this guy. This is Paul, and you'll notice he has 2 abilities. One is stun your opponent down at the cost of cards in hand, so he's essentially a 3-hander on his attack turns. And 2 is turn any attack into 1.3 million volts. So he reminds me extremely strongly of the Innsmouth deck that I previously played. And, well, let's take a look at it, shall we? I'll bring in the past footage with my buddy Linusec, and we can get over to that crazy, crazy deck. So I will mention again at the end how that deck might be updated for Spotlight, because it's not really going to work into Standard, and how Paul might use some of the same concepts. That's all for now. Enjoy the video. Hey folks, totally not named Dan here, so you can call me that if you want, and I've talked previously about the Moneta deck I took to Nationals and came 30th place with, though, as said before, it could have done a lot better if I'd been better. How much better I could have done with that is not relevant today, though. Today, instead, I'd like to talk about the deck that actually got me to Nationals. This guy, Innsmouth. And to do so, I'm bringing in my buddy, Linusec, who I don't think you've seen in a video for a little while.
Hey.
Hey dude, how's it going?
Right. As well.
So you have opinions on this guy, I'm sure.
I like the cosmic horror.
Yeah. Yeah. And Innsmouth is very much based on the origins of cosmic horror as it is in the public eye today. For better or for worse, because, well, we all know Lovecraft, who designed the town of Innsmouth and its fish people, was not a great person.
No.
But, I mean, public perception of his work isn't even really based on him at this point, is it?
Nah.
It's
Completely separate from
adaptations,
his art, yeah.
it's spin-offs, it's other people's public domain add-ons to his work, it's everything. His actual stuff, honestly, even if you ignore the racist undertones, doesn't really hold up that great.
Undertones.
Well, the 1 or 2 I read, it was undertones. I understand there might be somewhere it's a bit more prominent. But yeah, in terms of the card game, I mean, I just think this guy's cool, and I find it very interesting that this is specifically a anime-only character. He was added to the anime to have 1 episode where he lost to Selkie and had interesting interactions with Tsuyu's power set. He's kind of designed to lose to Selkie in the card game as well, which we'll talk about in a future video. But for now, I do also kind of like how he's very similar to Deku 2, but just cooler and also not a bad version of Deku 1, because he's his own character. His abilities are discard 1 card, after you play a ranged or slam attack, it gets +3 damage, and add the top card of your rival's deck to their card pool. It stays face down unless it was somehow face up at the time. And then enhance once per turn your turn, discard 1 card from your rival's card pool, commit 1 rival foundation. So the first one of those is, basically it's Deku's +1/+3, except rather than actually getting plus speed, you get +1 progressive difficulty to all your opponent's blocks, which is slightly better. It's response speed, which means it interacts with flashcards, but it has the downside of also not getting all of those discard a card during enhanced step effects. And the other super interesting thing about it is that it has a completely different set of symbols and keywords attached to it. So you're not playing a busted punch lineup where you draw, and the discard isn't a cost. You are actually essentially playing a 3-hander most of the time in this 6-hand size character. He is a little fragile because he doesn't get to block very much.
It does seem to have some fun disruption now.
Oh, yeah. Because he gets that once per turn off anything that's a threat while also stuffing the opponent's card pool. As a character, he's really cool. And if we head on over to my little Photoshop rendering of my deck list, we can see exactly what I've done with him. There is only one flash attack to take advantage of that response speed in this deck, and that is Specialized Sound Waves. Specialized Sound Waves, however, does define a lot of the rest of the deck because it's a 2-check, which means we can't afford to run any 3 difficulty foundations, and if we want to be consistent, we kind of need to be very light on the 2s as well. The 2 that I opted for is Asui's Friendship here, which is after you deal damage with a range attack, your rival commits 2 foundations at the cost of you committing this 1. It's a great way to shut them down on your offense, and it means they have to block every ranged attack you play if they want to keep going. It's every attack in the deck. I thought I had some slams. I don't. It's every attack is ranged.
Yeah.
But it means this Specialized Sound Wave is a threat for that reason, and it's also a threat because you're giving it +3 damage. It's hitting for 6. Plus, it's also kind of just a threat because it draws you a card and maybe lets you fix your deck and fish up whatever you want from discard pile, but that's not about whether they block it or not. That's about it setting up something else that they then have to deal with as well.
Yeah.
So yeah,
4 high for 6 flash that refills is pretty nice.
Yeah. Although it doesn't fully refill, because remember, we're using 2 cards for every attack here.
True, but that's true. At least it is helping cycle, though.
Yeah. And if you have the momentum, it does let you pick up any card from your discard pile and then stack a 6-check on top. Because obviously we run Arrogant Disposition just for that 6-check and the nice +2 low block. Enhanced Commit, this punch attack gets -3 speed, was actually very relevant in the meta at the time, but punches are still a strong keyword. It will still randomly just be really good.
And even then, still a 6-check.
Yeah. Then the big one that makes up for our issues with having enough foundations is Small and Limber here. Yeah, it's a 4-check itself, but it lets us give +1/+1 to any charge, fury, or kick attacks, which a lot of our attacks are. And more importantly, it readies once per turn whenever a card leaves our stage. So to make sure that works, we got Feeling Cute, gives +1 speed by destroying a committed foundation. Oh, we can destroy a ready one if we have to, but committed's always better, because it basically means we get to go +1 foundations with Small and Limber. Also, that lets us throw away this big 3 after we've used its flip effect. We'll talk about that in just a second. It lets us throw away Requesting Assistance once we use that to ready a thing. And then Release kind of does the same thing. It's better on defense, but we can use it on offense just to get +2 to the check to block our own attack, which does nothing, but it destroys a foundation, so it readies that Small and Limber again. Requesting Assistance, the other card that readies, is absolutely disgusting, because yes, it requires us to have a momentum, and yes, it's a once per game, essentially, because of the way it flips, but it lets us ready Asui's Friendship, so if we hit with 2 range attacks in a row, that commits 4 things at the cost of us committing 1 and flipping 1.
That very much seems about just getting in small hits and trying to, drag the turn out somewhat.
So you say that, but remember, all of our small hits are getting +3 damage, so nothing is actually a small hit.
True.
The lines of play are, for example, we've got Tentacle Strike, has card pool remove after a card leaves your rival's card pool, commit 1 rival foundation. This is really cool because it's not limited during the combat phase, so you can block with this, and then when they clear their card pool, you remove this before you clear it from yours, and then you commit their stuff going into your turn.
Oh, that's cheeky.
And it's a +1 mid block, so it's very cheeky. But also, this interacts with your character's ability. The Enhance once per turn to discard a card from the rival's card pool. So anytime you need Tentacle Strike out your card pool, you can do it. So again, we're not dealing with a lot of progressive in this deck. Nitro Explosion Ignition also removes, but more importantly, if we go Tentacle Strike, then Nitro Explosion Ignition, we use character during Nitro Explosion Ignition, clear one of the 2 cards that's now in their card pool, remove Tentacle Strike, commit a second one of their foundations with the ability, and then Nitro Explosion Ignition responds because Tentacle Strike is a Fury to give us +1 momentum, which we then use on our third attack with specialized sound waves to stack the deck to find whatever we want, which is probably an Indiscriminate Shock, because Indiscriminate Shock gets stupid amounts of bonus damage for no reason.
That is a pretty nasty turn.
Yeah, and obviously that's an ideal turn, but we can also do that with 2 Nitro Explosion Ignitions. We can do that with a Vast Hybrid Chimera Kraken into a Nitro Explosion Ignition, and then use Manifest to clear it from card pool and draw another card. There are lots of ways this line of play can work, and that's kind of the point of the deck. But in addition to that, we can go into turn 2 and have momentum then if we need. That's also a way to do it. Sorry, turn 3, the second attack turn. One of our other lines of play is just we use Quick draw a card if it hits, and then we stack the opponent's deck to make sure that they're going to be unable to block it.
And then use that with Asui's Friendship to start committing stuff.
Yeah, and also we've got specialized sound waves, we've got Manifest to replace itself, and we've got that big 3 that I mentioned earlier, if we ever get 3 cards in card pool, which is not that likely to be honest. But I mean, it's just a nice foundation to have otherwise, because it's stats. And then there's Destined for Mainstream Success, which fixes our checks and draws us any attacks that are on top. So there is a fair amount of card draw in this. It's not the same level that you would get in a Punch deck U2 deck, but there's enough that we can potentially extend our turn to either have blocks or get that 4th attack out. And if that 4th attack is Indiscriminate Shock, it's going to be lethal. And that's the thing with this deck. A lot of the time, it won't kill on turn 2, and you will have to survive a backswing. So there is some thinking about when you can and can't go all in. But at the same time, if you draw that good hand, this just kills on turn 2. This is very much a hyper aggro deck, the likes of your Ojiro and your Tokoyami and your early game Tsuyus, all those guys.
It's really interesting because you really have to think about how you play a turn out, because one wrong play and you've blown all your resources or something that didn't get you enough.
Yeah, just like that Ochiko 1, it is very much a puzzle deck. It is very much you draw your hand, you see your lines of play, you play them out. However, the amount of card draw it's got means you do need to reassess that throughout the turn as well. So, despite being a hyper aggro deck, this is quite thinky. It's not like your All Might True Form, which just said, play your attacks in number order. This is very much a deck where you have to think about whether you want to play out your entire hand, which parts of your hand you play, which you discard, and what order you do everything to get the craziest combo. That specialized sound waves is your weakest attack at 6 damage. We then got a whole load of 7s. Some of them get powerful 2 off Nitro Explosion Ignition potentially. And then there's just a random 8+, which is probably actually going to hit for at least 11. And a 9 over here. Note, this 9 also commits and freezes, so sometimes it's worth just poking with this to make sure that your opponent can't do too much on their next turn, and then ending turn once you've got the momentum from it.
Best defense is a good offense.
I mean, sometimes best defense is just a bad control-y offense.
Oh, that's a good point.
Which is as much what Vast Hybrid Chimera Kraken can do. The freeze is really useful. We only run 2 of it because it is a 5 diff. It's not something we want to see all the time. We very much want to be seeing our 4s and 3s more. Or we want to be, if we're committing out to play a 5 diff later on in a turn, we want it to be Indiscriminate Shock, which does at least 11 damage. Because, you know, you've got the stun one, you've got the commit off its own enhance, and you've got the commit from Innsmouth. Guarantees they will have at least 3 committed if they have at least 3 foundations.
So that is just a lot of damage out of potentially nowhere.
Yeah. The other thing that's nice about Vast Hybrid Chimera Kraken is in momentum once per turn it gives +2 speed. So if you just shove it into momentum with your Manifest, it then gives your next attack +2 speed to force it through. It's not the biggest deal, but it's something that's interesting, worth considering, and a reason to play it in addition to what it actually does as an attack or as a Fury.
It's one of those cards that's not too amazing, but helps join the deck together.
Yeah. And I don't think this is a top tier deck, but it's definitely up there. And if you went to Nationals, you would have seen a lot of Tabe players that maybe didn't have the most success, but clearly had some. Clearly were putting in work with Tabe decks. This definitely raced Tabe. In the finals of the Geek Retreat Professional Store Championship, that was the name they eventually went with. In the finals of that, I did face a Tabe, where going first, I just won every time, and going second, I 2-0'd them, but only because I got really lucky and drew that turn 2 kill hand. Otherwise, they very much had the advantage when they were going first.
Sometimes you just got to draw the out.
Yeah, either you draw the out or you win the dice roll. Otherwise, this deck is not beating Tabe. But I mean, that's 2 separate ways that you beat Tabe. It's a good chance. And that's one of the tougher matchups for this. Wildly, this does deal with things like Mirio, because it just gets to constantly throw stuff, and it doesn't care about the fact that he makes things unblockable, because either he dies or he doesn't. He doesn't block anyway. And likewise, it's okay versus Overhaul, but it's actually not the best because Overhaul has the ability to recur blocks. So yeah, it's not the best anti-meta deck or anything, but it's alright. And it definitely does very well just below the top tier.
So very much a rogue deck.
Yeah, very much a rogue deck. I mean, if you want to play this style of gameplay, most people would just play that Deku too. But personally, I think this guy does enough interestingly different stuff to warrant playing him over Deku 2, considering him his own character.
Sometimes it's just nice to figure out something you find interesting that most people don't really consider.
Yeah. And a lot of my decks are that. Even my blatantly obvious built since set 2 hasn't really changed Moneta deck. I built it as a joke, it turns out it became popular after that, and then it faded away again. But it's still good, and it's still worth bringing back. And the one card it really has gained is Manifest.
That's a very roundabout and very obnoxious way to force blocks through.
Yeah, absolutely. This card in Moneta is absolutely, completely and utterly unfair. In everyone else, it's good to mediocre. But in Moneta, it is actually just not okay. And so, while it's not necessary for his deck to function, it really pushes him to the next level against the top tier characters and the meta hate characters. Manifest in Moneta it's not okay. In this deck, honestly, it's just okay. That's why I'm only running 2 of it. But in Moneta, you throw in 4.
It does sound very nasty.
And that's everything I had to say about this deck at the time, but as you could probably tell, the deck was made for set 5 of MHA. We've had 4 sets and a whole load of challenger decks since, not to mention an increase in the minimum deck size. So what do I advise for it going forward? Well, to start with, I advise ignoring half the sets because the original deck was far too reliant on the first MHA one to survive the move to standard. Keep it spotlight only, and look at just Jetburn, Girl Power, and the upcoming Dark Deku Challenger, which is also going to prove a great boon to Joda's qualifying list whenever we get to that. From among those, there are surprisingly few good attacks for this build, and while we're already running a considerable number at 20, this hyper-aggro style of play wants to remain extremely attack-heavy. So as we work our way up to 60 cards, I suggest bumping up the quick draws up to 4, and adding in Last Second Release, a Deku card that's both charged and ranged to play nicely with both Innsmouth himself and the bonus from Small and Limber. Also a fantastic opener in that it allows us an extra instance of targeted committal if our opponents try to go into our turn with defenses. And honestly, Deku's swift takedown doesn't look bad either. It's just a little light on the speed. Then as we move on to Foundations, Curious About Quirks is some of the best card draw this game has ever seen in my opinion. Reliant on your opponent, but more specifically on them doing literally anything with their character, which means a deterrent or an extra attack on your turn, or if they're purely offensive build themselves, an actual chance at blocking for once. Or with our newly increased total of 12 charge attacks, Flustered looks quite promising on paper, though I'm actually going to say no to that one, due to its 4-check and the fact that most of our charges are turn enders. Personal Reload also does a lot, however, even if it doesn't put us positive in hand size, to filter for our best attacks in this now larger deck and push our attacks through with that 1 extra speed. And I think we can get away with a couple copies of Incompatible Quirks too, as a fantastic addition to the number of foundations that sacrifice used foundations to ready Small and Limber and or ready themselves. So here's what I think the final deck should look like. Not vastly changed from what we had before, just a little bit bigger and better, most likely not keeping up with the newer crazier decks competitively, but still proving fun to play on the fringes, playable if not actually amazing anymore. But I just think it's cool this guy still kind of lives. That's all on my Innsmouth deck for today, but if you remember, I promised you something a little more too. A quick look at what I have planned for the upcoming Innsmouth-like character Paul Phoenix. a recent reworking of the old Tekken character who comes with a 1.3 million volt finisher built in, allowing him to essentially play the card in standard. I love Paul. I love that he's bringing back Innsmouth's style of play. I love that he just gets to stun 2 on every attack. And I love how with Attack on Titan's attune symbols, he gets to play 8 cards that when discarded draw him a card, regardless of which symbol you actually play him on. 4 of which, Wish Hard, actually double up as a crazy way to double his stun potential. Though Wish Hard is far from the wildest thing he has access to. Over on All, this guy has card draw for days, but Order is where we really get to capitalize on his stun, with Wind Up Punch again doubling what he has on face for the simple cost of having used character, and cards like Making a Stand or Drowning in Resentment buffing every attack that has that keyword. So that's stun 4 essentially on our very first attack, so even if they go into our turn with nothing committed, that's the perfect setup for a Walk the Dog. Which sure, isn't a punch or kick, but who cares? Only our kill card needs to be, right? Walk the Dog is just a 6/6 draw a card 4 diff for damage. That's the kind of silliness this guy gets to play. Now throw in Botan's coaching and final test, and you have a way to ensure he can do it consistently. I'm not going to show you the rest of the deck just yet, but that should be more than enough to get you started, and you might just see the full thing after regionals. Until then, that's it from this Not Down to the Future. Stay tuned for more of me and my buddies, and I'll catch you in the next one. Perhaps even that Selkie list I mentioned. Bye!